All right. Welcome, everyone. Happy Feast of the Annunciation for everyone on the astronomically accurate calendar. That's my little joke to my Russian friends. Thank you for joining us for this important webinar. We had hoped to have my colleague and fellow Archon, George Zimmer, with us. He's having computer trouble. Hopefully he'll be here in a minute. I'd like, on behalf of the Order of St. Andrew, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us. This is one of a number of planned events that the education subcommittee of the Archons is developing to sort of educate our audience and a broader audience to issues affecting the church globally. As you all know, the order is deeply committed to the idea of religious freedom, and the war in Ukraine brings all of this questions about religious freedom. It really presses them, and so we thought we'd explore this. When we planned this panel, we didn't know that the news was going to move as fast as it has, and so I'm really excited to speak with my friends here. Before we go any further, His Eminence Archbishop Elpidiophoros has prepared a short welcome and communication, which we will play first, and then we will get on with the panel.
Esteemed Archons of the Ecumenical Throne, distinguished scholars and members of the academic community, beloved sisters and brothers in the Lord. The collaboration of the Academia Symposia Committee of the Order of St. Andrew the Apostle and the Orthodox Christian Studies Center of Fordham University is truly blessed. Blessed because it brings into focus in a dispassionate way perhaps the greatest challenge for the Orthodox Church in our modern era. This webinar, Religious Freedom, Self-Defense, and the Orthodox Communities in Ukraine, is especially significant, occurring on the feast of the Annunciation of the Theotokos and the commemoration of Greek independence. May we all embrace the source of our liberty in Christ. I want to thank Archon Eftaxias Emmanuel Velivasakis of the Academia Symposia Committee for his sponsorship of the event. And I want to thank Professor George Dimakopoulos, Archon Didaskalos Tougenos, for moderating. Additional thanks go to Symposia Committee Chair Dr. George Zimmer, Archon Prostatis των Grammaton, and Vice Chair Dr. Stamatheos Kartalopoulos, Archon Exarchos. And to the distinguished and learned academic participants, we are all very grateful for your presence and for your insights. As someone who was privileged to travel with His All Holiness to Ukraine in 2008, when I was Chief Secretary of the Holy and Sacred Synod, I witnessed firsthand many of the initial stress points that will be under consideration today. But even with those forecasts from 15 years ago, few could have foreseen the horrific invasion by Russia and the complicity of the leadership of the Moscow Patriarchate in this utterly unwarranted and unjustified aggression against the Ukrainian nation. As a result, less than 1 year ago, we witnessed the canonically confusing step of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church under Metropolitan Onufriy cutting off its formal ties to Moscow. But at the same time, not engaging in rapprochement with the Orthodox Church of Ukraine under his beatitude Metropolitan Epiphanios. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which was granted autocephaly and presently so by the Mother Church of Constantinople in January 2019, is the logical and canonical container for a unified Orthodox Ukrainian Ecclesia Church. But there are many exigencies and contingencies at play, some of which will be discussed today. With the war still raging, and the Ukrainian government under President Zelensky wishing to further distance Russian propagandistic meddling from the life of the Ukrainian people, the ecclesial body under Metropolitan Onufi is under pressure from the government to cede very sacred sites of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. In recent days, Patriarch Kirill has appealed to world religious leaders on behalf of those being lawfully expelled from the Kiev Cage monastery. The hypocrisy of this plea is absolutely astounding. Russian mercenaries and soldiers murder, rape, kidnap, and loot with his blessing, Patriarch Kirill's blessing, even with his jihadist-like promise of heaven for killing their spiritual brethren. And incredulously, here in America, some are taking the side of the murderous Putin regime against the democratically elected government of Ukraine. A remarkable inversion of falsehood over truth. What is needed now more than ever is boldness before God and man. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church under Metropolitan Onufi has opted for half measure, cutting off the formal relationship with Moscow and floating in a canonical fog where no one can really say what the status of his ecclesial entity is. He should have gone first to the Mother Church of all Ukrainians. He should have gone to the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople in order to find the solution to his ecclesiastical and indeed political predicament. The ultimate resolution of the problem is clearly one unified Ukrainian autocephalous church, which combines the Orthodox Church of Ukraine with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and stabilizes both within the cultural and political context of Ukraine, a free and independent nation. There is need to remove any suspicion that any part of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is a fifth column inside Ukraine. And there is also need for the government of Ukraine to observe a non-coercive stance when it comes to the religious liberty of the people. Let us be completely transparent. Putin is the aggressor, period, without any justification whatsoever. And there is no such thing as Ruski Mir, as Russian world, the imperialist model of ethnic affinity that neither comports with the current state of affairs or with the bloody history that has led to the present situation. Putin has forgotten and forsaken the Lord's Prayer, which states, "For thine is the kingdom, not mine is the kingdom." The invasion of Ukraine cannot be justified or excused and is a clear violation of international law and norms. When this invasion is overcome, the need for forgiveness will be as overwhelming as the horrors that have been perpetrated on the populace. The Orthodox Church in Ukraine must be the place where healing occurs, and for that to happen, there must be a unified church encompassing all Ukrainian Orthodox Christians. When the Most Holy Ecumenical Patriarchate established the Orthodox Church of Ukraine with the granting of the Tomos of Autocephaly on January 2019, it brought back into communion with the worldwide church millions of Christians who had, through the fault of their own, been excluded from the canonical order. Now, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is, as I said earlier, floating in a canonical fog and its faithful must find a canonical hold. Again, the Mother Church of Constantinople is ready to step in and meet the need in accordance with her spiritual and canonical authority. The Russian Church cannot be trusted to do what is right, especially when it blesses violence. Therefore, the work of this symposium today is of the utmost importance. I commend all of you in your efforts to find the common ground that is needed to bring the Church into peaceful and canonical unity. There is a resolution waiting, but we must engage the hard work of reconciliation and accommodation with all the determination and passions that our love for Christ and his Church can muster. Thank you for your presence and thank you for your persistence. May the Lord show us the way to a peaceful and just conclusion of this awful invasion as soon as possible. And may the Orthodox Church shine forth as the beacon of hope for Ukraine, leading all from the mire of the hate and bitterness to the land of forgiveness through the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Okay. All right. Well, we thank His Eminence. Nate, I just want to make sure that we have this recorded, and if we haven't started yet, we'll
Yes.
Okay, and we'll splice in the other. Okay. So I love His Eminence. He does not mince words. So we got his opening statement. We're going to proceed now with really a great collection of guests who are going to have their own opinions about the best path forward and the real complexities of the situation on the ground. So let me introduce each of our speakers. I'll mention that we have a professional historian, a professional theologian, someone trained as a journalist, and a professional political scientist. I think all of us dabble in all of those fields. I don't know about political science for myself, but we all dabble in all of this, and I'm really looking forward to this. So with us today, we have Elizabeth Prodromou, currently at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts, but moving next year to Boston College. Congratulations on that, Elizabeth. Nadia Kazinko, Professor of History and Director of Religious Studies Program at the University of Albany. Father Cyril Hovorun, Associate Dean at the St. Ignatius Theological Academy in Sweden and Senior Lecturer at the Stockholm School of Theology. And Sergei Shapnin, Senior Fellow at Fordham University's Orthodox Christian Studies Center. So let me begin with the remit that we proposed. I think everybody had a hand in writing this about a month ago, and obviously the news flow has changed since then. But in the years since Vladimir Putin's invasion of their nation, the people of Ukraine have endured relentless violence, economic catastrophe, and enduring hardship. In addition to mobilizing its military defense, the Ukrainian government has recently passed legislation that places new scrutiny on religious organizations administered from a hostile country to determine whether those organizations are undermining the nation's self-defense. But what are the limits of these laws? And will they become the basis of a de facto criminalization of the Moscow Patriarchate's alleged supervision of its parishes in Ukraine? How might this legislation challenge or enable the integration of the autocephalous Orthodox Church of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that was until May of 2022 aligned with Moscow? The one piece to add, and I expect each of our speakers to add to this, is this law within the last week or two has been used to expel or potentially expel the Ukrainian Orthodox Church monks, seminarians, theologians, and so forth from the famous Lavra caves in Kiev, with the expected date of their expulsion March 29th, which is this coming Wednesday. So that's it for me. We're going to hear from our panelists. If anyone watching has questions that they would like to ask, please put them into the Q&A and we will try and save time for that. So Father Cyril, why don't you begin? Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you, George, for the introduction. Many thanks to the Archbishop, His Eminence, for really a very crystal clear message. We have those messages from the Ecumenical Patriarchate in the purest form, I would say, without euphemisms. And this is probably the only church globally that speaks up clearly and without euphemisms about the war, for which I personally am grateful. And I know that a lot of people in Ukraine appreciate this voice, these messages. Let me very briefly summarize the situation where we are. I think this situation is particularly the situation in which the Ukrainian state is very similar to what Homer described regarding Odysseus. When Odysseus was to navigate through Scylla and Charybdis, the two perils. Actually, the description of Homer is very dramatic, but they say that those two places are in the straits between Calabria and Sicily. I was there just a few months ago. It is not as dangerous as it is described by Homer, but at least in this description, it is really like a very difficult dilemma for Odysseus to navigate through those perils. I would say that Scylla in this situation is really an outrageous behavior and collaboration of many representatives of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which many believe, and I also believe is still in unity, canonical unity with the Moscow Patriarchate vis-a-vis the war. The kind of instances of collaboration, the instances of ignoring, the war, the instances of collaboration with the perpetrator, with the aggressor, they are like torrent. The news come up, on the everyday basis about, just another bishop in the exchange, in the exchanges with his Moscow peers, complains about Ukraine and wants to leave to Russia. But what keeps him in Ukraine is his property and his gold. Literally, he explains this in this way. There are really instances and cases of collaboration on each level of the church. But again, it's too fast, it's too dangerous to jump to the conclusion that the entire church is to be blamed. That is, I think, one of those very important nuances that need to be taken into consideration, that the crimes, even crimes, I would say, because some priests have been charged, for correcting the Russian artillery. They worked as correctors of fire, and those are crimes. Even such crimes should not lead us to concluding that the entire church is to be blamed. And I think it is also important to understand in Ukraine. So that is how we go to Charybdis, which is the danger of infringing on human rights, on religious freedom from the Ukrainian state. And actually, if you have a solution, if you know how to navigate in this situation, please give us an advice, because it's really an uncharted water. It's really difficult to take responsible decisions, having on the one hand the existential danger of elimination of the entire nation, by this war, with the collaboration and corroboration from the church, and on the other hand, the danger of turning into something which is very similar to Russia. That is a danger that Ukraine faces. Sometimes we turn in what we fight. This is the danger for Ukraine, to turn into something which is similar to Russia. And I think this is really important. Before proceeding to judging the situation, I may suggest two hints or two kind of preconditions, if I may, to pose. Regarding what is happening within the Ukrainian Orthodox Church some people call it ex-Moscow Patriarchate, or some people say it's just Moscow Patriarchate, or hidden Moscow Patriarchate. I believe it is well, canonically speaking, it is still a part of the Russian church, like the dioceses of the Russian church. And one has to take into consideration what is happening within the church. So the church is really polarized. It is really divided. And the division is not the according, along the horizontal axis, so to say, but along the vertical axis. It's a division between the hierarchy, the priests, and the lay people. I would argue that the majority of the lay people, a vast majority, an overwhelming majority of the lay people, the majority of the priests, and a minority of the bishops, they are against the war. But I would say the majority of the bishops are either actively or passively supporting this war for different reasons. Quite a few priests do the same. Quite a few monks do the same, but again, not all the monks. And this causes really a very difficult situation within the Ukrainian church, which is falling apart. Essential, and it is falling apart along the vertical axis, so to say. The problem of the leadership of the church, that they perceive themselves as hovering above the law. This is the custom, this is a post-Soviet situation, which you can see in Russia. It stems from Russia. In Russia, the church has learned since the collapse of the Soviet Union that it is above the law. They can do whatever they want and get away with that. The Ukrainian bishops, especially in the Moscow Patriarchate, they learned the same custom, unfortunately. And now it's very difficult for them to unlearn this. When they are forced, to obey the law, when they are put to the frame of the law, then they complain. They say this is the persecution against us. Of course, there is another aspect to that. According to, I think, this Brazilian dictator, Varga, who used to say that the law is for my enemies and for my friends, everything is permitted. So the law should be applied, of course, consistently across all the religious groups. And I think we can observe it. Like, for example, the recent sanctions against the religious leaders recently included also some Protestant evangelical leaders, not just the Orthodox leaders, which I think is an important kind of indication. Then the last point I wanted to mention is that another problem of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate is that it tends to identify bishops with the church. So the bishops behave as if they represent the entire church. And the misbehavior of the bishops gets projected in the eyes of the society, in the eyes of the state upon the entire church. And I think this is unfair. Of course, this identification is enhanced by bishops themselves. This has been demonstrated in a very recent event when a week ago, approximately, there was a session of the Holy Synod of the Ukrainian Church, when many people expected the Synod to take decisive steps in order to amend the situation, to improve the situation. And instead, they just went to the presidential office and made a stasis there, like a demonstration that we want to see the president on the spot. And they waited there for 2 hours and they went away with nothing. Well, imagine the United States in the situation of the war, like existential, really huge war. And all of a sudden, some religious leaders decided to show up to the White House and to demand the president to meet them on the spot, like within 5 minutes or so. This is something impossible, and it is impossible in Ukraine. It was possible before the war. But the problem before the war is that when for example, the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the presidents called the bishops of the Ukrainian Church to come and to discuss the problems of the church. On the eve of the council in 2018, the Ecumenical Patriarch sent letters to all the bishops of the Ukrainian Church, and those letters were returned unopened by those bishops. The president at the time, Poroshenko, called those bishops to come and to discuss, not to impose his will, to discuss. They turned down that invitation, and now they come and they demand invitation as if they are above the law and as if they represent the entire church. So this is like an amalgamation of the problems that this church faces. The last thing, really, I think there are some problems also in attitude from the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, the Autocephalous Church. I believe this church uses this situation sometimes, not always, but unfortunately, it learns to instrumentalize this situation to its own ends and interests. Like, for example, with the monks of the Lavra. Essentially, they were given a dilemma, and I think it was a false dilemma. If you want to stay in this monastery, which you love, which you dedicate your entire life there, you have to switch to our jurisdiction. I think this is a wrong idea. This is a kind of an excruciating kind of choice for those monks. And it seems, as far as I learned from the monks, they don't buy into it. Even though there was a group of monks who wanted to join the autocephalous church, they decided to turn down this offer because I think it was not a fair offer. So it's difficult. So advise us how to navigate between Scylla and Charybdis.
All right. Thank you, Father Cyril. Thank you. Dr. Kaczynka.
Thanks very much. I'm afraid that I don't see the situation as clearly as either the good bishop or my predecessor, Father Kirill, have. I think these are hard days for Orthodox Christianity, for the relationship between church and state, and for Ukraine. And tragically, it is in war-torn Ukraine, with the national survival at stake, that the hard days for Orthodox Christianity and hard times for the church-state relationship are being tested. As George noted, we have here experts in theology, in geopolitics, and religion, and conflict resolution, and in breaking news. My task as a historian is to provide a bit of historical context, contemporary history. In 2019, under President Petro Poroshenko, the Ukrainian government helped establish the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. It also supported the ecclesiastical recognition of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine by the Ecumenical Patriarch. President Zelensky, who beat Poroshenko with over 73% of the vote in the second round, precisely because of his appeal to broader sectors of society, took a very different path. He avoided religious politics and kept his distance from religion in general. In fact, just about a year ago, even after the invasion, in April 2022, Zelensky's parliamentary faction maintained that parliament would not consider a proposed ban on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church until the war was over, so as not to provoke division within Ukrainian society. However, Zelensky's attitude started to change in fall of 2022. From October to December 2022, the Security Service of the Ukraine, the SBU, conducted several churches of Ukrainian Orthodox Church properties and the private residences of their clerics across the country, and reported finding Russia propaganda materials and evidence of Russian citizenship obtained by several Ukrainian Orthodox Church clerics. The reported findings, however, do not suggest any illegal acts by the persons who were searched. One might argue that it is in bad taste in wartime to own Russian pamphlets or Russian rubles, but it is not forbidden by Ukrainian law. On December the 28th, the Ukrainian Constitutional Court found legal a law that would require the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to change its name against its will. On March 10th of this year, the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra complex, a state-owned institution, informed the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that on March 29th, the previous agreement they had on the free use of state-owned property will be terminated, and that Ukrainian Orthodox Church monks, hierarchs, and students of the Kyiv Theological Academy, many of whom have family members fighting for Ukraine, must vacate the premises. In addition to those people, the Lavra also hosts refugees from the areas in war. The monks might find a refuge in other Ukrainian Orthodox Church monasteries, but for the students and for the teaching process, it will be much harder. I'm glad that Father Kirill mentioned the meeting on March the 20th, because when that happened, I thought that Ukraine now has its own version of the humiliation of Canossa. But while at Canossa in 1077, it was the Pope, Gregory VII, who forced the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry IV, to supplicate and to ritually submit himself for 3 days. In Kyiv, it was Metropolitan Onufry of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church who had to wait in the street outside President Zelensky's office only to hear Zelensky's representative make an official statement that President Zelensky had no intention of meeting with any Ukrainian Orthodox Church hierarchs and to be relegated to a brief session with underlings. True, it was tone deaf to bring along Metropolitans Pavlo and Antony, both sanctioned by the Ukrainian government, but still, I don't see the large-scale collaboration that Archimandrit Kirill has described. Indeed, there have been instances of collaboration. I think the scale is much smaller than he has described. Personal guilt and collaboration should and must be punished according to the law, but it must not be translated into collective responsibility. If Pavlo broke the law, he is responsible, but not the whole monastery, and certainly not the students of the academy. The state can and should go after wrongdoers who have been proven guilty, but that does not mean the entire Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And here I must disagree with a good bishop, because let us be clear. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church represents one legitimate strand of Ukrainian Orthodox history, and the Orthodox Church of Ukraine another. As early as 1917, when the old Habsburg and Russian imperial structures fell apart, Ukrainians already had competing visions of what kind of orthodoxy, what kind of national Christianity they wanted. The 1921 Council creating the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church, the second Ukrainian Autocephalous Church in German-occupied territory, North American emigre activism for both Ukrainian national sovereignty and ecclesial independence, the creation of the Ukrainian Exarchate, and then the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and the most recent post-Soviet developments, including the creation of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, all showed these different legitimate versions. Both are equally Ukrainian, and both have a right to exist within Ukraine. Both have a right to exist, just as Republican and Democratic parties are equally American and have a right to exist. So here's where we are. Legally, the state can do whatever it wants with the Kiev-Kiev Lavra, but just because it has the right to do it doesn't mean that it's right to do it. We are not talking only about the expulsion of monks and the entire leadership of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church from both Lavras in Ukraine, Kyiv and Pachayev. We're also talking about over 250 students and 50 instructors. Is this the way to build the kind of bridges between the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Orthodox Church of Ukraine described by Archimandrite Serafin Pankratov in a recent public orthodoxy post? Or is there, in fact, no interest in trying to build the kind of civic society that Viktor Zelensky used to exemplify? Clearly, the state is using all the tools at its disposal to place enormous pressure on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. The UN Human Rights Office has documented cases of discrimination against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church since Russia's invasion escalated in 2022. Just yesterday, buses of Ukrainian Orthodox Church pilgrims to the Pachayev Lavra were turned back by police. They were not allowed to worship at a place of worship. It is hard to interpret the Ukrainian government's actions in the two Lavras as anything but a political tool used against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It is also hard to escape the conclusion that, as Archimandrite Serafim noted, now that the Orthodox Church of Ukraine is in favor, as the Ukrainian Orthodox Church once was during the Kuchma and Yanukovych presidencies, the temptation to take advantage and to suppress the hated opponent is almost irresistible. To be sure, wartime policies on religious organizations are fraught with risk no matter what decision is taken. Clearly, Russia is the villain, and the Russian Orthodox Church deserves full blame for its support of this war. From the point of view of moral credibility, the Russian Orthodox Church has long forfeited any moral standing it may have had. But that is not what we are here to talk about. What worries me, what worries us, is that the Ukrainian state is now going down a slippery slope fast, what Archimandrit Kirill described as the situation in Russia. Yes, this is a state of war, Yes, it is Ukraine who is the victim, but a state of war does not excuse attacking the religious freedoms of believers. And think of Ukrainian civil society, both during and after the war. Should the Ukrainian state attack a sector of Ukrainian society representing a legitimate difference of church opinion, and which should be encouraged to stay part of the Ukrainian civil project rather than alienate it? The implications for the future, I'm afraid, are grim. Those who really are collaborators will be strengthened in their victim narrative. By contrast, self-critical Ukrainian Orthodox Church voices who teach in the academy may be lost to future inner Ukrainian and inner Orthodox reconciliation work. As our recent book, here it is, a little promotional thing, tried to show, the differences between the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Orthodox Church of Ukraine go beyond those of the immediate political moment. They have exposed larger fault lines within world Orthodoxy, something shown again most recently in Patriarch Bartholomew's actions in Lithuania. But the Ukrainian government won't bring the two churches together by such Soviet-style political actions. Right now, its actions deeply contradict the spirit of the meeting, the encounter between Ukrainian Orthodox Church and Orthodox Church of Ukraine clerics, the spirit of the All-Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, the spirit and the hopes of the Maidan, and the spirit of multivocal Ukraine itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Sergey.
Yes, let me continue. I'm really happy to hear that we are all almost on the same side, and I deeply appreciate Nadia's analysis. What I would like to add is first, that of course, Ukrainian government and Zelensky himself, they were not ready to kind of change the religious policy in Ukraine. The idea was kind of to step aside, but because Putin and Kirill instrumentalized our orthodoxy on their side, that was the clear thing to do. Zelensky also has to sort of to pay serious attention to his religious policy, and I think he wasn't ready for that. First, he invited the rather kind of European style head of the state service on ethnopolitics, Alena Bogdan. And she was not that tough and radical for the purposes of this changing religious policy. So she was replaced by rather well-known religious scholar Yelensky. Anyway, it seems that all these decisions that the state is making now, they are not well grounded. For example, this I think the first step, or the first important legal step or paralegal step, was this sanction lists of the citizens of Ukraine with a few bishops and priests. And that's actually almost the same as what Putin did in Russia with foreign agents. He sanctioned citizens of his state without any legal proceedings. That was just by the decree of the president, with no way to sort of to apply to the court. The whole procedure did not supposes that there could be any legal legal decision on that. The second act, as we see now, with Lavra, formally is clear. It's just the museum on behalf of the state stops the agreement with a monastic community. But in this lower Lavra part, there are 70 buildings and who will take care of them? This is not just the monastery, our 200 monks are not able to run 70, just formally speaking, are not ready to run 70 buildings. They need more people. They need, I don't know how many, another few hundred, maybe 400-600 people to do that. And surprisingly, the government wasn't aware that in Lower Lavra wasn't only the monastery, but also the spiritual academy, the different synodal institutions and other organizations. So when the question about Kiev Spiritual Academy was raised, the government was surprised. Well, what's that? And because that was under the agreement with the monastic community, there is no clear solution for that right now. So all this, as Nadia mentioned, 250 students and 50 teachers, lecturers, professors of the academy who are actually living, who are also living in Lavra, they just cast out. They're taking out all their stuff, their library, their computer class, whatever. And that means that the process is broken. No one knows where and how the students will continue their studies. So this is, if you have questions, if you call the monastic community with its abbot, Metropolitan Pavel, the kind of the ячейка русского мира, the kind of the part of the network of Русский мир, there should be our court decision on that. And if there is no court decision, then this is just a part of propaganda. And I'm afraid that this anti-Ukrainian Orthodox Church propaganda is extremely strong because our government now controls almost 100% media in the country, and it's not that difficult to organize this pressure in the media. So what's the real situation? I think that's an important question. We learn from not from kind of official statements. Actually, the state is keeping silence now for quite a few weeks, and we learn from social media. We learn from independent sources, and I think this is not the right thing. I mean, we do have questions to Ukrainian government, and I think the last thing that I will also mention here is I agree with Nadia again that there is no way to kind of de-establish, to wipe out the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It will continue to exist. It will continue to exist, and the communities will be stronger because they feel this pressure from the government. They feel the pressure from the outside. They feel that they are martyrs, and that's, of course, strengthens the spirit. Well, something is wrong with them. I agree, and their faith is mixed with ideology. But at the same time, all this there should be a process of healing, and of explanation, but not of kind of pressure and persecution. Some people say, well, we shouldn't say about persecutions against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They are not started, but we are on the age now, and I think the voice of the Christian community should be outside Ukraine, should be balanced, and we should voice our questions. And I think we have to. We would like to get answers both from the government, from Metropolitan Onufri, who is unfortunately keeping silence, and this is a kind of a bad kind of silence, and most probably Metropolitan Epifani. We need explanations from all the sides, from all the groups.
Thank you, Sergey. Dr. Prodromou.
Thank you for welcoming us, George, and for organizing this. And thank you to all of my distinguished co-panelists. Coming at the conclusion, I don't want to be too repetitive, but some of the things that I'll say will echo what we've already heard. And also, I begin with one brief correction. I'm actually no longer at the Fletcher School. I joined Boston College in January, so just to get my affiliation correct. So what I thought I would do is focus my remarks on the three terms in the title: religious freedom, self-defense, and the Orthodox communities of Ukraine. And I wanted us to think, and I think it's come out beautifully in everyone's remarks until now, but I wanted us to think about how the Orthodox churches, plural, in Ukraine, so the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, the OCU, and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, UOC, can indeed support and defend religious freedom. And so the foundational question for me is, or where we begin, is what we mean by defense and what we mean by religious freedom. And so if we, look at Merriam-Webster's thesaurus, we'll find that, defense implies the action of defending from or resisting attack, including the means of defending, the laws for defending, and of course, the identification of enemy or enemies. And I think what is tragically clear from our discussion today and what we're seeing on the ground is that there isn't real consensus amongst within the Orthodox churches about who is the enemy or who are the enemies. Certainly there is, I think, consensus between the two Orthodox churches in Ukraine that the enemy or the foe is the Russian state. I think they would all agree that, and they have agreed, that Russia has violated the foundational principle of sovereignty that has been the bedrock of the international order since the 17th century, with the Peace of Westphalia and even its deeper roots, half a century or a century before, at the Peace of Augsburg. And notions of sovereignty, which are premised on territorial integrity and the inviolability of borders of states, have not been questioned by either of the two churches. They recognize that Russia has violated in the worst possible way the territorial integrity of the state of Ukraine. But when it comes to religious freedom, and here I'd like to actually do a little bit of a dive into what we mean by that, I think there's far less consensus between the two churches and within each of the churches. And I think, Father Cyril, your observation about sort of vertical versus horizontal, but in particular vertical disagreement within the churches is especially helpful there. So let me say a little bit about what we're talking about when we talk about international human rights law and religious freedom. For the most part, we're referring to Article 18 of the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR, which guarantees freedom of conscience, belief, and religion. We're also referring individually and collectively. We're also referring to Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, and also to the Declaration on the Elimination of all forms of intolerance and of discrimination based on religion or belief. And religious freedom is also enshrined in key articles in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, the International Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and the Convention relating to the status of refugees. I go through this not to provide you a laundry list of dry international legal instruments, but because these are indeed the frameworks in which the Orthodox churches in Ukraine, and I hope globally all Orthodox churches, will refer when they take positions and decisions on the kinds of issues that we're seeing in Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, One of the other things I think that's important for us to consider is that in all of this jurisprudence, freedom of religion, belief, and conscience has many intersections with other human rights: speech, assembly, thought, practice, education, property ownership. And the prohibition, there's also an important support for training, electing, and appointing clergy free from state interference. So I think these are, important reference points for us to keep in mind. Now, if all of these freedoms are guaranteed by international law, what's also critical to recognize is that there are permissible limitations or derogations that refer on these freedoms, and these are usually related to conditions of violence or war. And here I refer us to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights that I referenced earlier, the 1976 Covenant, the ICCPR, that under Article 19 says that everyone shall have the right to hold opinions without interference. Everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression, and this continues. But most importantly, then, Article 20, any propaganda for war shall be prohibited by law, and any advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence shall be prohibited by law. So here we're beginning to see, in terms of the legal frameworks, the complexities at work and that confront both of the Orthodox churches in Ukraine today. Now, I think, again, it's been very clear that in terms of defending against enemies of religious freedom, and that includes the Russian state and the perpetrators of the war, the Russian military, and it also includes the Ukrainian state and Ukrainian state combatants, the military, that things are very complex. And while, we certainly have seen that Metropolitan Epiphanios, Metropolitan Onufri, the head of the Greek Catholic Church, Archbishop Sviatoslav, they have all condemned the war. Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew has categorically condemned the war. That, the only outlier here is, disgracefully and exceptionally, Patriarch Kirill, who has supported the war, actively supporting Kremlin actions, and I would say perverting Orthodox theology by making statements like sacrifice in the course of carrying out your military duty washes away all sins. But be that as it may, after that general agreement, what I think all of the presentations have shown is that there is disagreement or confusion when it comes to the international tools that I just mentioned, legal tools that I just mentioned. And I think, Nadia, your, Professor Kizenko, your, observation that the churches are living on a slippery slope when it comes to the kinds of legal changes that we've seen in Ukraine in particular since December 2022, and that slippery slope is one that presents great dangers to the religious freedom and to those hostile to religious freedom of both of the Ukrainian Orthodox jurisdictions. And here, I quote from the legislation that says that, activities of religious organizations will be banned, those organizations, namely affiliated with centers of influence in Russia. And I think that's the real question here, how to determine what are those centers of, what are those religious organizations affiliated with centers of influence? How do we define legally affiliation? And then most importantly, within the context of permissible limitations, what are the mechanisms that can be taken and that can be supported, in fact, by both Orthodox churches in Ukraine within that context to bring those violators and perpetrators to justice? And again, going back to your introductory remarks, Father Cyril, you said, well, what can be done? What are the mechanisms? Well, arrests, prosecutions, and convictions of hierarchs, priests, civilians who, are part of the church apparatus that violate international law, that are in violation of that new law. But that means that we need to see fair, free, transparent, independent judicial practice, and we need to see convictions that conform to international human rights law. And thus far, I think we see a state of confusion. And I think one of the things that we can say, all of us categorically, is that historically, Orthodox patriarchates and churches have not fared well under non-democratic states. And that means whether we're talking today about post-Soviet states or the other range of non-democratic regimes under which many Orthodox churches continue to survive, certainly not thrive, that when churches begin to look to states for solutions, those are usually don't work to the health of the churches. And so I think at this point, because I know I'm coming up on time, I think the key thing is to distinguish, first of all, to learn international law, to deploy it in ways that all of the churches can and should support for their moral and theological authority. And that also the second step is to ensure that these churches do what I think everyone has been advocating here, go beyond statements and move to action. And that action most crucially involves engagement between the leaderships of both the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. That's not an easy request, but I think it's existentially the single most important thing that needs to happen so that churches can be unified in identifying who are the enemies of their and others' religious freedom, how they can defend it using the tools of international law at their disposal, and at the end of the day, how it is that ecclesially and ecclesiastically, this war won't mean further destruction of these churches that are already martyred churches by virtue of the Bolshevik experience and now twice martyred by virtue of Moscow's or the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So it's just going to be easier for me to refer to all of you by first name since we've all been friends for so long, and I'm just going to get confused. So thank you, Elizabeth. So, all right, we have a lot here. I mean, we have some diversity of opinion, but I think there is also some consensus, right? I mean, we seem to all agree that the context of war throws everything into confusion, right? That it really makes it just makes the situation more complex. I think we can all agree that, or it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like we agree that just de facto criminalization of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church would sort of violate all notions of religious freedom, right? And that this would be deeply problematic. But it sounds like we can also agree that there are some individuals within the Ukrainian Orthodox Church who are sympathetic to the invasion and in their own ways, either through rhetoric or perhaps through actual on-the-ground assistance to the war effort, have been jeopardizing Ukraine's security defenses, right? So I guess my question for you is, how does one, whether it's the state, the believer, like whomever, how does one go about adjudicating what to do with the fact that you have individuals in the church, some individuals in the church who are welcoming the invasion and supporting it, right? I think we can agree that criminalizing the whole church is the wrong way to go, but how does one go about, right, in the interests of national defense, right? How does one go about investigating and corralling those individuals of the church who are causing trouble? Anyone who would like to jump in, go ahead. Father Cyril.
If I may, also to respond to other colleagues, panelists, briefly, I'll try. I completely agree with Elizabeth regarding how to deal with the crime of collaboration, because it's crime now. It has been criminalized. I mean, collaboration. It's in the Ukrainian laws. I agree that it's wrong to evict the entire church on the basis of instances, how many they are. It could be like 90% of instances of collaboration, but still it's not a reason to ban the entire structure, the entire church. So it needs to be taken individually, all the crimes, all the instances of collaboration. And I think from the beginning, actually, that was my suggestion as well, that those who are to be blamed need to be proven that they are to be blamed and brought to justice, to the Ukrainian courts, and then the Ukrainian courts should decide and must decide, only them must decide who is to be blamed and who is to be convicted. And I think we are somehow on the way, hopefully. The sanctions that were mentioned by Sergei, the deprivation of citizenship, it's a part of this process. I slightly disagree that it's beyond the law, it's outside the law. No, it's legal. It's illegal in Ukraine to have double citizenship. And it's the prerogative of the presidents to decide who is to be granted or deprived of citizenship. That's exactly what happened. Those bishops and priests who were found to have double, some of them have had 5 citizenships. At least, well, anyways, they went against the law, and it was up to the president to decide what to do, and the president decided to deprive them of the citizenship. So it was legal; it was not illegal. Now the next step would be exactly to bring those cases of collaboration to the Ukrainian courts. Sometimes it happened, like the priest. I don't recall exactly his surname, Father Andrei, in Luhansk area, who was the corrector of the artillery. He was convicted, and he was exchanged for the Ukraine prisoners of war. And actually, Evgeny Prigozhin, the notorious head of the Wagner group, participated personally in the exchange, and he, received this guy, this priest, at the Ukrainian border. So there are some cases, but I think it's needed to have more cases and more justice according to the Ukrainian law to serve to those cases.
Nadia.
Thanks. I agree completely and would follow up on what Elizabeth said about transparency and publicity, because I think the thing that what makes lay Ukrainians and outside observers like the World Council of Churches and the Pope of Rome nervous is that when reprisals are carried out without trials, it's not a good look.
Yeah.
But I actually would also suggest that having the very fact of having someone, of having an office to deal with religious affairs, it's very Soviet. I mean, having somebody like Zelensky in place, having a government office to deal with religion, because Western states don't have that. That implies a certain level of control. I would actually float the possibility to increase the distance between church and state, of not having a point man or an office whose job it is to deal with religion in an official way.
Interesting. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I would come back to this whole issue of fair, free, independent judiciary. And by that, I think the judiciary is crucial in terms of, how laws are implemented, not how they're written necessarily. There's how they're written, and then there's how they're implemented. And the critical importance of an independent judiciary that's neither subordinated to the FSB nor to the executive branch, I think, is really crucial. And there, I think the international community can do a little better at trying to encourage that and also provide guidance on that. And I think also in providing support to Zelensky, President Zelensky, in the face of the domestic pressures that he faces that would run counter to that. Then the other thing too, I think, the revocation of dual citizenship, I confess, I don't know, and I'm taking you, certainly, Father Cyril, you know this, that multiple citizenships are illegal in the case of Ukraine. I think stripping those citizenships away or requiring they be renounced is one thing, but rendering somebody stateless by revoking their Ukrainian citizenship if they don't hold dual citizenship is another matter. So again, here we get into the complexities of domestic and international law and their intersection. And then finally, I think regarding the issue of Office of Religious Affairs, Nadia, I think you're absolutely right that that sounds very Soviet. It sounds, I would say, more than Soviet, more authoritarian, because we see these existing in other non-democratic states like China and Turkey and others. But we should also not, make the mistake of thinking that Western European states don't simply call these by other names, and find ways to regulate their religious environment. Again, I think for the churches, what's particularly challenging are two things. One, the conditions of war, and two, the fact that there is hardly any communication at the senior level across these two churches and more broadly. And I don't know how to make that happen or encourage that to happen, but I think that's the absolutely essential piece in all this, so that the churches themselves don't become generally victims to a set of conditions that hopefully soon, in a peaceful post-conflict environment, will work to their detriment and to their ability to speak legitimately in defense of a freedom of conscience, thought, and belief for all Ukrainians, regardless of belief or non-belief.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Sergey.
Yes, just to reply to Father Cyril, I think this is, we shouldn't mix two different things, deprivation of citizenship and sanctions. Well, you could be deprived from citizenship, but it's still legal for you to have bank account, sign documents, and so on. And these guys were sanctioned in a totally different way, than just deprivation of citizenship. Another point, I think, general point, I think which is quite important. We were focused on kind of church-state relations, but I think it's extremely important for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to voice its position towards these collaborators with Russians, and there should be ecclesial court, or at least I think the elements, new elements of conciliarity, of sobornost, should be introduced within the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We know this strong and brave voice of parish priests in Ukraine. They wrote a very important appeal. They put questions before the hierarchy, before the synod of Metropolitan Onufri's Church, and there was silent, kind of total silence in reply. And that is, of course, the serious problem for the church. Also, there are questions without answers, and that goes on for weeks and months. And I think it seems that for the moment, the hierarchy of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is not capable kind of to deal with these issues. And that's creates tensions both within the church and between the church and the society, between the church and the state.
Thank you, Sergey. I think Nadia wants to respond, and then I have a question for Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I want to pick up on something important that both Archimandrit Kirill and Sergey just said, and that is that perhaps a solution can be found in the very Ukrainian tradition, as Nicholas Denisenko describes it in his book, the most recent church history of Ukraine, that the tradition of sobornopravnost. Yeah, I mean, that in other words, trusting conciliarity, but above all, trusting lower level encounters and not privileging episcopal encounters to the degree that we have. I mean, that from what we've seen so far, parish priests left to their own devices actually manage to communicate with one another. And it is at the episcopal level that things seem to be stymied. So that might be one place to look for.
Yeah, thank you. Father Cyril, you'd like to respond to that?
Yeah, very briefly.
No, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, I agree with this suggestion of Nadia, and I think it's very valuable. And that was the basis of my proposal regarding the Lavra. I actually suggested that Lavra should have several communities, monastic communities, one of the Autocephalous Church, another one of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and possibly a community under the Ecumenical Patriarchate, because there is a bunch of monks. I spoke just a couple of days ago with one of them who belongs to the community of Lavra, and they say, we don't want to stay, with Metropolitan Pavlo. We don't want to go to the autocephalous church because we still don't trust it. But we trust the Ecumenical Patriarchate. We want to go under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So it's still possible to have a community of the Ecumenical Patriarchate in Lavra. And my suggestion, another point of my suggestion was that those communities need to elect abbots for themselves, not abbots to be appointed, by the primates, but to elect themselves. And then this will, I think, will make this monastic life healthier from many perspectives.
Yeah, thank you. So the Order of St. Andrew, of course, is first and foremost concerned with the survival of the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the promotion of its legal and political defense in a hostile state in Turkey. Some of our guests you may all know this because you're all very, very smart, but one of the challenges that the Ecumenical Patriarchate faces is a theoretically highly secular state of Turkey that claims that all religious treasures belong to the state. So things that have been in the possession of the Ecumenical Patriarchate for a millennia are claimed to be owned by the secular state of Turkey. And so there's always the risk because of the hostile environment there that the Patriarchate could be exiled, could be expelled, and that all those religious treasures would somehow go into the hands of Erdogan or something insane like that. And so the question I want to ask to Elizabeth, because she knows this situation really well, is there some kind of parallel situation going on here, right? You have a secular state that claims possession of the Lavra, right, and is adjudicating against perhaps the principles of religious freedom, adjudicating in a position that it sees as part of its national defense, part of its sort of right to do so, because all of these things, these religious treasures are treasures of the nation, right, rather than treasures of a religious community. So I was just because this touches home to so many Archons, I wanted Elizabeth to reflect on this, and then I'm going to try and take a few questions from the broader audience.
Sure, thanks for the question, George. Just a couple of points. One, in general, I think this is a really important moment in terms of cultural heritage law and what's happening with the repatriation of cultural heritage that includes religious heritage, around the world. And even in the case of Greece, we've seen in the last couple of days that the Vatican Museum, made the decision to return several artifacts to Greece. The Minister of Culture, issued a statement, very positive statement about that. I think it's a horse and two heads, male heads, that are now going to reside in the Acropolis Museum. And there have been, decisions regarding the Metropolitan Museum of Art and their willingness to repatriate artifacts as well. And I introduce all of this because this is part of the larger question about who owns history. And I think that's a big piece of what we're also seeing in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And the war in Ukraine is a competition about, or disagreement about, who owns history. And religious sites like the Lavra complex become sort of the physical spaces in which that disagreement plays itself out. Regarding Turkey, what the Turkish government has tried to do is to use a 1906 decree that mandates that all antiquities that were sourced in the country be considered state property. So that is interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one is there was no state of Turkey in 1906. The Republic of Turkey was established, its founding moment, on the genocide of 3 Christian communities in the 1922-1923 period, 1923. And actually, that's probably what President Erdogan is waiting for, the centennial in October, so that he can, claim that he's the greatest politician in Turkey. And sideline Kemal. So they reference an article that predates the existence of the state, number one. And number two, the other thing that Turkey has done is, and I think here's where other states and international institutions need to be very careful, they signed a memorandum of understanding on cultural heritage in 2021 with the United States. And that memorandum of understanding, presumably a bilateral memorandum of understanding, presumably is designed to prevent the pirating and pillaging and pirating and international black marketing of cultural heritage in Turkey. Now, what's interesting, and I'm looking at my text here, is that it identifies materials that go back as far as 1.2 million years before Christ, and then up through 1770. The year 1770 after Christ. So what that means, and that covers all faith communities and all cultural heritage in Turkey. So what that means is that, you know, Turkey is now claiming, the Turkish state is claiming ownership of all religious and cultural heritage property. That would mean everything from text to textiles to, crosses, or to take your pick of whatever faith tradition you belong to.
It would include relics,
that
right?
would include all relics
Yeah.
that the Turkish state claims that anything that's found inside the boundaries of the contemporary Turkish state, dating back to 1.2 million years before Christ, are property of the Turkish state, which means that faith communities in Turkey essentially lose anything that ownership over anything that belongs to them. Now, importantly, many in the international museum community and collecting community have pushed back against that. And there was an important ruling just recently in New York on a very, very famous, case on the Stargazer 6,000-year-old marble idol that the Turkish state has pushed hard to recover this artifact, and the New York state courts ruled that the Turkish state doesn't have a claim on ownership of that Stargazer. It's associated with a very controversial collector, Michael Steinhardt, but nonetheless, the New York state courts ruled that the 1906 decree does not apply to this case. And so I think that's an important pushback against what Turkey is trying to do. And again, it underscores the fact that heritage, cultural heritage, religious heritage are now the things of contestation between states. And also in the case of Ukraine, and I'll wrap it up here, I think what we're seeing is that both in terms of Russian military action, and unfortunately in the case of some Ukrainian military action, either the deliberate or the secondhand targeting of religious sites and the destruction of cultural heritage. It's a loss for all Orthodox Christians in Ukraine. It's a loss for all Ukrainian citizens, and it's something that hopefully the two churches that we're talking about, and also the Ukrainian state, will oppose. And I think the Ukrainian state has begun, I know they have begun, with the start of the war to try to document any kind of losses, because this is going to require in the post-conflict period an enormous effort to reconstruct these kinds of sites and all that goes with them in a way that establishes ownership, but most importantly, I think in terms of the churches, allows them to come together rather than to continue the war in a different way over who owns religious heritage. And that's going to be a heavy lift, and that speaks to, I think, some of the things that everyone on the panel has discussed, and that's the issue of mercy, compassion, repentance, justice, and healing. And that's going to be very difficult. But when you're talking about a case like Turkey, an authoritarian, and I would say totalitarian state right now, the issue of heritage being used and weaponized to homogenize populations and to wipe out the living and any memory that those communities were there, that's a crime against humanity.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, so I don't want to keep everybody forever. So what I'm going to do is there are several questions in the chat. Thank you for those. I'm going to read 3 of them, one after another. And then I'm going to ask each of you to offer a kind of final reflection, perhaps to the extent that you wish, to one of these questions that I'm reading. Okay. So the first question is from Orsa Velavasakis, who asks, since the Moscow Patriarchate is strongly in favor of the Russian invasion, how can the government of Ukraine allow any church to be associated with Moscow without running a serious risk of subversion? Should the branch of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which currently reports to Moscow, well, that might not be quite the way they would self-describe themselves, to Moscow, should it be perhaps put under receivership till the war is over? The second question from our mutual friend, I believe everybody knows her, Natalia Vasilevich, she asks, I also want to add, she'd asked some previous questions, I also want to add a problem. Because the voice of the international community in support of freedom of religion or belief in Ukraine, perhaps this gives an opportunity to Kirill of Moscow to step in and instrumentalize this issue in an anti-Ukrainian propaganda. And then we have a third question from an anonymous attendee. Would you support an international third-party negotiator between the two Orthodox churches rather than discussions under the auspices of the Ukrainian government or Office of Religious Affairs or the Office of the Patriarch? Okay, so we have those questions, and I'm sure we all have many more, but so as to give everyone back their Saturday, I'll ask each of you to make some final thoughts, and we'll go in the order with which we started. So Father Cyril.
Right. Let me start with the last question. I believe that the role of the Ecumenical Patriarchate could be really crucial in negotiating reconciliation between the two churches. I think it is one of the priorities for national security to reconcile the two churches. And I believe that the most important interest of Moscow in the situation of the conflict between the two churches is to stir the conflict. It's not to support the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. It's not. It doesn't, I mean, Moscow doesn't care really, I believe, about the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine. What they care about, that the conflict continues. That's why from the perspective of national security, it's crucially important to facilitate the rapprochement between the two. And I see that neither church is able on itself to do this. Yes, we hear nice statements, from the churches, about the dialogue, but in reality, they don't really mean it. And as the Ecumenical Patriarchate had played a crucial role in establishing the Autocephalous Church of Ukraine, so I think it is the only trustworthy ecclesial authority for in Ukraine to step in and to facilitate this.
Thank you, Father Cyril. Nadia.
Well, I mean, as regards the first question, it seems to assume that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is part of the Russian Orthodox Church, and the only person who thinks it is the Russian Orthodox Church on its website. As I said in another context, if you are an abused partner and you walk out and you assume that you're independent and the abuser says, no, I'm still with you, are you going to believe the abuser or the victim? So but I actually, the only question that I would have about the Ecumenical Patriarch as being an arbitrator is that, as I understand it, the Ecumenical Patriarch thinks that the question is resolved. I mean, the other day, like the Orthodox Church of Albania requested a pan-Orthodox synaxis, but the Ecumenical Patriarch said everything is resolved. There's no need to discuss. So, I mean, I like the idea in theory, but I'm not sure how it would work in practice. And finally, along the lines of what Elizabeth was saying earlier about heritage, I just want to point out that the Ukrainian Office of Religion refers to relics, which you mentioned, George, as museum exhibits. I mean, like, that's a problem.
Yeah, for sure. Sergey.
Yes, I think, well, the idea that for the moment two churches are not able even to negotiate, and there are informal consultations, and that's maximum what they did. The role of our external international facilitator is important, but I think the main problem within the Orthodox Church is that there are no mechanisms for this facilitation at all. And of course, we would like to say that that could be the role of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. But I think there are no specialists for nor for kind of moderating this kind of discussions, no experts within the Ecumenical Patriarchate on the Ukrainian situation. So theoretically, yes, but in practice, I don't think for the moment it's almost impossible. It's just a dream.
Elizabeth? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Quickly regarding the question of whether there's a risk of Kirill instrumentalizing the freedom of religion or belief, religious freedom, discourse, and what's happening at the Lavra, I think, yeah, he's already done that. But I don't think anybody would take that seriously other than other authoritarian regimes and, the media echo chambers that support that. And here, I think the key thing for me is that the mediatization of this war is something that has really worked to the detriment of any kind of reconciliation between the two Orthodox churches. So it's difficult to sort of cut through what's happening, on all sorts of media platforms to the facts on the ground. So that's one thing. So yes, weaponization or instrumentalization, but that doesn't mean that the issues are not legitimate in and of themselves. The second thing is regarding the Patriarchate, the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Yes, I think in an ideal world, that that's the institution, that's the Patriarchate, that's part of his prerogatives of primacy to negotiate some sort of a reconciliation. But for all the reasons that my friends and colleagues have pointed out, that would be very difficult. Perhaps it's possible then for a set of third-party conveners to convene, in fact, in a space, the possibility for these churches, the Ecumenical Patriarchate with the two Ukrainian Orthodox leaderships, to meet and converse. I also think it's really important to go back to the issue of what are the mechanisms, the institutional mechanisms of the church that exist, for example, spiritual courts that can be used even under these conditions to address the injustices that we're seeing and the crimes that we're seeing. And then finally, I would say that there's a whole cycle and a whole set of consequences that are already ensuing from the war in Ukraine. And I refer here to the Latvia decision, which has gotten almost no attention in the international press, but the decision of the Latvian government at the end of last year to require, or to first encourage, but then require that the Latvian Orthodox Church would be separated from and have full autonomy. They use the term autocephaly, all the dioceses, parishes, and institutions from any church authority outside of Latvia. Again, I think this is a really, really dangerous precedent to be setting for states to somehow be requiring by law Orthodox churches to change their names and to support, whether passively or actively, a change in their affiliation. I think it's a really dangerous business for states to begin to involve themselves in decisions of autocephaly and autonomy, et cetera, which takes us back to the need for churches somehow to figure out a way to come together to discuss these issues. And for us to assume there's a silver bullet and there's going to be one meeting and everything will be fixed, I think that's a mistake. So we need to recognize this will be a really sort of torturous, but nonetheless, I would say essential process.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's as the Byzantinist in the group, I'll just say that, this particular series of tragic events is new and unique, but the idea that churches sort of fracture and need reconciliation is as old as the church itself, and it often takes generations, unfortunately. Listen, we're in the Lenten period. All of us are comfortably giving this talk from the West. I think this needs to be acknowledged. It was an oversight. We probably should have included somebody actually from living in Ukraine on this panel, and we'll try to do that sort of thing in the future. We pray for the health and security of everybody in this conflict, for its speedy resolution, for a glorious Easter, Pasca. Let me thank the leaders of the academic subcommittee of the Archons, George Zimmer, Stamatios Kartopoulos, and Emmanuel Velivasakis, who were instrumental in putting this panel together. I thank them for organizing it and trusting me. Hopefully I didn't let you down. Let me also thank my colleague at Fordham, Nathaniel Wood, who did the digital behind the scenes because none of the rest of us know how to do this. So thank you, Nate, for handling that. And thank you to each of the panelists. Really, I've learned so much from this, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and good night, everyone.